Yeah, I'm gonna fiddle with those a little bit. So is everyone here ready?
Yeah.
Yeah? For what? Oh, I don't know. I just kind of pulled a PowerPoint presentation I had on my computer. We'll go with that. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
Cool. So hey, I'm James Cox, and I'll be speaking to you today about metafiction in video games. A little bit of an overview. First, I'm going to tell you, well, first, why metafiction? What is it? Is it important? Why should we care about this? What isn't metafiction? There's a lot of things that are metafiction, but there's even more stuff that is not metafiction. And it's important for us to kind of have that distinction between the two. Some kind of examples. I did a lot of research. I have 25 working examples for metafiction, classifications of those examples, ways that we can kind of understand it and break it down easier. And the last thing is potential of metafiction in video games for the future. First thing, my background is a production background. I've dabbled in academia and critical game design a bit, but first and foremost, I'm a game creator. So the majority of the stuff I'll be talking about today, while it does have academic and critical elements to it, it's gauged more for a creator's point of view and from a creator's point of view. Along the same lines, I'm currently making 100 games in 5 years, 75 down, a little bit over a year to go, so I'm a little behind. I'm going to irk it out, I think. And I've been experimenting with these metafictional practices throughout a lot of these games I've been creating. Some context for discussion. The majority of the media I will be talking about is traditional media. And when I say that, I mean not necessarily alternative games or art films or experimental novels, but the societally accepted norm of these mediums. And that's just important because there's a lot of things that kind of blur the lines between metafiction and not metafiction based off of, the genre it falls into or how experimental it is. So to make things a little more clear-cut for discussing today, I'm just speaking about the very norm, kind of AAA versus alt games. And the last thing is, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. There is a lot more to be researched in this area. This is more of kind of a brief survey or kind of a glimpse into the kinds of things we can do with metafiction. There's a lot more that can be done with this. So why metafiction? It smooths out rocky play. If you have metafiction in your games, it'll allow you to maintain player attention through parts of the game that may deimmerse the player otherwise. If you have something in the game that admits that the game is a game, then it's easier for the player to continue being involved in it. The best example I can think of right off the top of my head was the first Assassin's Creed, where when you were inside the simulation, there may be some things that would kind of break the game. Maybe there's some little bugs, but because your character was in a simulation, you may not otherwise notice it. It may seem like it was intentionally part of the game. Kind of like in the Matrix where you see that cat repeat itself a couple times. If a game does that and you know that you're in a simulation in the game, these elements are easier to gloss over. They're a little bit harder to think, oh, this is breaking the game. It feels like it could almost be purposeful, so it helps with that. It also relates games to the real world. It means that when you're in a game and it has these metafictional aspects to it, it's inviting you into the game. It's saying, I am an artifact of real life, and it's easier to understand it that way. It kind of blurs those boundaries. So what is metafiction? Well, first off, it is fiction. We're not talking about autobiographies here, or what are they called? Documentaries. That's hard to think of. Yeah, it's very much separated from reality. These things are works of fiction. They break the fourth wall. And when I talk about the fourth wall, what I mean is that in traditional plays, you have 3 walls, 2 side walls and a back wall. And when you break the fourth wall in a play, it's when someone comes out and actually speaks to the audience, a character within the play. And by fourth wall, metafiction addresses the audience directly or indirectly. It's pretty much admitting I'm a character within a piece of art, within a fictional world, and I'm speaking to you, the audience, or you, the player. It admits authorship through that. Because it's a piece of fiction, there is an author behind it. It's not something that came out of real life. There's somebody who's created this world and the story that you're currently absorbing. So for definition, for metafiction in video games, and this is particularly to talk about metafiction in video games versus metafiction in other mediums, which has been much more researched. We're going to be using the definition that metafiction is fiction that is self-aware. It's a piece of fictional media that admits that it is, fictional media. It is aware of its own state of fakeness. What isn't metafiction? So when I began my research, there was a lot of things that kind of not necessarily blurred these boundaries, but kind of confused it. And I had to take a step back and look at other mediums. So when you're looking at novels, you have a lot of this kind of front matter, bibliography, you have an appendix, you have the title page, you have all this stuff that you wouldn't really consider to be part of the actual novel, or at least part of the story, but it is very much a part of the book, and it's a part of the medium, and we accept this when we're reading books. Same thing with films. There's opening credits, there's the opening title, there's the end credits. You wouldn't necessarily consider these parts of the fictional world or the fictional story, but you would consider it a part of the overall film or the overall novel. So when we're taking that into account for video games, we have to know that in video games, things are constantly changing. The inputs of video games are constantly changing. These things aren't necessarily solid in every single game. So it's a little more loose, it's a little more fluid, but when we're talking about video games, you have to accept that there may be tutorial elements and things that talk to the player from kind of an instructional point of view that aren't necessarily coming from an in-game character, but are more the game having to teach you how to read the medium. Unlike a film or a book where there's a lot of accepted kind of conventions and you understand that when you're going into it, such as time jumps, when you're entering a game, it differs from game to game. And we haven't settled down enough yet with these kind of elements, and maybe we never will. Could be a perfectly fine thing to not do. We have to accept that there will be conventions that we have to kind of get over, and these elements that aren't necessarily part of metafiction and aren't part of the story, but are necessary for the player to understand in order to embrace the game. And next one is Inception media. Has anyone here seen Stranger Than Fiction? Okay, cool. Just wanted to ask so I can give this explanation without boring people. In Stranger Than Fiction, there is metafiction within the actual story. It's about somebody who's having a novel written about them in real time in the world, and it affects the things that they do. This person writes a novel, and then he enacts those actual actions. That in of itself isn't metafiction. If you write a novel about somebody writing a novel, that's not reaching out to the actual audience. That's kind of internalized, writing about fiction. If you make a game about making games, unless it reaches out to the players in some kind of way, it isn't metafiction. And the last thing is metagaming. Metagaming and metafiction can be confused. They both have meta, and they're both about games. There is a difference, though. Metagaming, unlike metafiction, is about gaming other players. It's about taking outside knowledge and applying it to in-game systems. A good example is that if you are in a chess tournament and you know that your opponent has a particular set of moves or an opening they like to make, you can take that knowledge, that foreknowledge of the game and of your opponent, and use it to your advantage when you're competing against them. That's what metafiction is. It's taking outside knowledge and applying it to a system in order to, better master the system, better overcome your opponent. So, for the examples in the research that I did, the process was gathering a bunch of games. The games I gathered, I found through forum posts, asking around on forums. I asked friends for examples they had. I asked people online. And there was also from past experiences, places that I knew metafiction already existed. It was a little hard to track down because this is a fairly new area still to dive into. So there is most definitely a cross-section bias. The majority of the examples I have are more prominent AAA games and larger indie games. There isn't as much smaller alt games and hidden gems online than I would like there to be. There's also 25 examples. For collecting them, I documented these games using SurveyMonkey. It was the easiest way to kind of go through it, gathering information I can, watching YouTube videos, playing snippets of games when I got the chance, reading about them. And then I entered information about these experiences on a SurveyMonkey account, so I had all that stuff kind of nicely laid out. And the way I documented it was based off these 4 different types: emergent metafiction, immersive, internal, and external. And I'll be explaining those in just a second. So, emergent, immersive, internal, and external. Emergent metafiction is metafiction that directly admits its own artificiality. It's the most common type of metafiction people think about when they think about metafiction, and it carries over into games as well. It's where a character in the game very obviously, very bluntly kind of says, "Hello players, I'm a character within this video game." And I have a nice little example from Animal Crossing. Mr. Rossetti, which is the character we're about to see, pops up in the game. Told the character when you reset it. So what you notice here is Rossetti is actually looking towards the player. When Rossetti is talking to the character, he'll be facing your character. He won't be facing you. So right now he's actually talking about the game, and he's talking about how you shouldn't reset it. If you reset it without saving, you can try to do that to game the game if you made a mistake that you want to undo, if you did something that kind of breaks it. And now you can see you turn back to face the player, so now he's actually back in the game and talking to another character within the game. And you can see the other character doesn't admit it either. They're there, but they don't actually see this happening. So this is the first kind of metafiction, actually breaking the fourth wall very directly, saying "Oh hey, I'm a product of Nintendo, don't reset the game." And the clever, cool thing about Mr. Rossetti, a little unrelated to metafiction, is you can see this video is about 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Most of this is just Rossetti berating the player for resetting the game. So Nintendo actually did this kind of clever thing where the character wastes your time as a punishment. You actually have your time eaten up by the game for resetting it. And it kind of, didn't make me want to do it again. I kind of prevented myself from resetting. I just was playing more carefully after that. The next one is immersive. Immersive metafiction most times has to do with alternative controllers, headset inputs, these other ways that kind of bring you into the game's universe, which is different from the previous kind, emergent, is rather than the game saying, "Hey, I'm a video game," this tries to make your use as a player, where you're sitting, the way you're communicating with in-game characters, the way that you're experiencing the world to kind of bring you into the experience. The example I have here I couldn't find any videos of, but Lifeline is a game where your character is trapped on a space station, and there's some kind of zombie or alien running around killing people. And your character is actually in a control room, and she has to help navigate people throughout the space station using security camera footage. So you have to kind of go through different security camera footage and try to figure out where the characters are, and you have a headset, and that's how you tell these characters where to go. So you're communicating to them, telling them where the enemies are and how they can avoid it, where they need to hide, what they need to do to get through these obstacles, which is really cool because even though in real life you're not actually sitting in front of a control panel, like your character is in the game, you are actually sitting in front of a computer wearing a headset just like your character, giving commands to the people in the game like your character in the game is. So that makes use of your place as a player to put you in the role of that character in the game. Another example is Tom Clancy's End War, where you have to give commands to all these different troops, and you're giving it through the view of, I think it's aerial drones. Aerial drones are helicopters. But you have an overview of the field. You can only really see things wherever your plane or helicopter is currently, and you have to give commands through your headset to tell your troops where to go and what to do. And it kind of puts you in the role of somebody that's actually giving commands to troops from some kind of control facility. So immersive metafiction takes your role as a player and puts you into the game world. It doesn't necessarily admit its own artificiality directly. It doesn't say, "Hey, I'm a game," but it makes use of that disparaging element of you sitting in front of a screen to try to help catapult you into the fiction and help immerse you more into it. The next one is internal. Internal metafiction is self-contained. Most times this is used for situational irony. Characters will say things, they will admit that they're within a game. Other characters won't get it, but they'll never actually address the player directly, which is a little different from the other three kinds. It's the only kind of metafiction where the in-game characters never fully break the fourth wall.
At least I learned something from all this.
I'm going to restart that. YouTube videos volume should be normalized. Future project.
At least I learned something from all this.
What's that?
So you have a couple of options. One of them is internal.
I'll pay more than $20 for a computer game.
A what?
I don't know.
So that's a small clip from the end of Monkey Island. I know it's a little hard to hear. One of the options you get to pick at the end, after your characters are celebrating, when your character says, "I've learned something," is never pay more than $20 for a video game. Your companion then says, "What did you say?" And your character says, "I don't know why I said that."
Mm-hmm.
So it's this kind of thing where you as the audience are like, it's a video game, I get it. And your character is really confused about why they said that. And they have no idea what a video game is. At least to my understanding, within Monkey Island, video games don't exist. So it's this internal metafiction. It stays contained within the universe. They never actually break the fourth wall. They never say, oh hey, we're actually characters in a video game. But it still alludes to that. It still kind of hints at the artificiality of the fictional universe. Another good example, did anyone here play RuneScape? I had a really bad addiction, yeah. Back in middle school, that was bad. I can't touch RPGs, it just eats up all my time. Well, there was a bar in RuneScape where you have a character, if you go up to this bartender in RuneScape, this character has this conspiracy theory about everyone being in this video game. And your character's never given an option to say, like, I agree with you. Your character has all these skeptical things, like, you're crazy, or like, what are you talking about, or different things like that. And it was kind of situational irony where this person was telling you something that you know to be a truth, but your character will never admit to it because... Actually, I don't know why they wouldn't admit to it. I guess it's just funnier if they don't. But that's another bit of internal metafiction. And the last kind is external metafiction. External metafiction most often appears as Easter eggs. It is metafiction that none of the in-game characters see. Most times it is a message from the developers to the players through elements kind of scattered throughout the game. The biggest example I found of it is in the Xbox, I think it was just Xbox One, it's been a while. I think it was the entire game has a song in the background where the creator of the game and their friends in a band made a song about the game named I Made a Game with Zombies in It. It's a top-down zombie shooter game. The name of the game is Made a Game with Zombies in It. The song in the background is singing about this game with zombies in it. And eventually the ground starts right there. I made a game with zombies in it. But your character isn't aware of any of this. Your character's shooting zombies, they have no idea any of this is going on. I assume they can't hear the music, it's non-diegetic. So this is a message directly from the developer to the player that completely bypasses the in-game characters. It's actually kind of a fun game. I'm not sure if you can buy it on the newest Xbox. I assume you can. It was a really good, surprisingly well sold game. This is kind of an example of the end result of the collection I did. Something else I needed to point out, or something else I need to point out, is that it is more of a spectrum. There isn't necessarily one category. Every instance of metafiction can fall into multiple things, and games don't have to use just one. So, for example, on there, Star Tropics has emergent, immersive, and internal, and The Sims has internal and external. So not every game only has one type, and games can have multiple types. I'm pretty sure the Stanley Parable has everything but external, and even that's arguable because the entire game is just metafictional. So you could argue that it has every type throughout the game. So, the potential of metafiction in video games. what does all of this mean? What can we do with this? Well, we can deepen stories with this. If we use metafiction in games, it may not be as jarring to actually get into a gaming experience because the story off the bat can admit this is a story. You can feel comfortable with knowing it's a story. You can kind of scrutinize it and kind of welcome you into the actual experience. The second thing is that it increases immersion. Like I was saying earlier with Assassin's Creed, if you have these instances that kind of break it, that doesn't necessarily have to actually break it. If the game can admit that it's a game, and you can accept that sometimes a game will mess up, and the game kind of admits that throughout its play, it'll allow you to function more smoothly, allow you to stay immersed as you're experiencing the game. And the last thing is that, and this would be kind of cool, we could phase out menus and tutorials. If we could dive deeper into metafiction, figure out combinations of these 4 different types to make menu screens and tutorials a part of the in-game universe in ways that games could actually incorporate it into the narrative, could incorporate it into the universe, rather than just kind of, a menu screen or tutorial that's themed like the game, but actually embrace it and put it into the game itself using a combination of those 4 different types, we could get pretty far. That'd be really neat. And the last one is enhancing educational experiences. This also has a lot of other, it's kind of a hot topic, educational games. One element that'd be cool about it is if you could have an educational game that would admit to the student that it is trying to teach them something, but then also allow that to be an element that helps bring the student in, rather than trying to hide the education component from a student or make it very obvious in a way that is not enticing. If the game had some way to kind of invite them into the game, saying, this is a game where we will hopefully teach you something, but it's also much more than that. Kind of guide them through the experience with the understanding that this is an artifact. So conclusions. Metafiction is very alive and very well within video games. People have been using it, sometimes knowingly, sometimes not knowingly, but it does exist, and there are probably well over, I don't know, I was going to say 100 games, but I feel like there's way more games out there than I'd be able to count. And there is much work to be done. This is kind of, like I said earlier, the tip of the iceberg. There is way more potential and way more research we could do with metafiction in video games, things we can kind of dive into and look at. This is the full listing of the 25 games. I think originally I had 35, and there were ones that were kind of dead ends in games I couldn't quite find online. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this morning to our panel. My name is Amanda Wong, and I am a master's student at Ryerson University in the Communication and Culture program in Toronto, Ontario. The talk I will be giving today is called Generating Spaces Outside of Video Game Culture Through Pop-Up Arcades. So I will be talking about my thesis work, which was a pop-up arcade project called Ludic Arcade. So in the next couple of slides, I'll be showing a shortened version of a clip that I had to sort of advertise my event, and these are just some of the games that I had there. So Ludic Arcade was a research-focused curatorial installation created with the desire to encourage the diversification and expansion of video game culture. The arcade is meant to be a sort of tool to help facilitate and create interest about the possibilities that mainstream video game communities can offer. And ultimately, I hope that by giving people accessibility to see and engage with this amazing work that such communities are producing, that they can broaden their understanding of games, and by extension, see the sort of issues that lie within video game culture. And first and foremost, for me, I'm interested in highlighting the oppressive harassment of marginalized communities. And I know that's a huge stretch. However, when stuff went down, I didn't want to sit back and do nothing, knowing that so many amazing people, many of who are here at different games, are fighting so hard to make video game communities a better place. So I was thinking, okay, what can I do? I have no background in game design or programming, community development, so what could I do? So I could confidently call myself a video game enthusiast, so I attempted to look up what that was online, and I was a little bit scared, but this is what came up, so I guess this is me. So I wanted to do something about the situation, but I was also scared because I didn't want to do something that would attract too much public attention, but I wanted to make a positive impact at the same time. So I was thinking, what should I do? Where am I going to do it? How am I going to impact? It doesn't have to be the world, but somewhere, right? So I just want to briefly go back to the title of my talk, which actually is not its true title. The registration form restricted my title length. I came up with this like...
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I came up with this like... It's transphobing. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
I just had to do this. So my actual title was procedurally generating maps outside of video game culture, game creation, and pop-up arcades. What I wanted to do was bring video game culture outside the context of online communities, because I was not going to have any of that online anonymous nonsense. So I borrowed the idea of games that use procedurally generated maps. I'm assuming some sort of programming algorithm would produce a game world. I'm not in programming, I don't know, but that's what I think it does. So I was wondering if I could extend video game communities into the quote-unquote real world, and I was thinking like in Minecraft, where we have procedurally generated maps that are created, and when players enter the area, they'll work either alone or together in communities to work the space, work the land. So I wanted to create a physical space where people could come together and play in public spaces, and that's why I thought pop-up arcades. And this brings me to how I found myself into the developing community in Toronto. So I said previously I'm from Toronto, just outside Toronto. So for a couple of years I have been fortunate enough to learn more about non-mainstream game developing practices of very cool people. And to be honest, I never thought learning about local game developers and making games would bring me here, because I know nothing about coding or making games. So at that time, two and a half years ago, I fell into the fallacy of focusing only on game content and forgetting the people who are making these games and who are putting the labor and ideas into these games. So I'm glad I took the time to stay. And I thought, what better way to critique mainstream video game practices other than to discuss and promote non-mainstream practices? So to my surprise, again, I was a baby in the community, I learned that there were so many amazing games that were being made, and I was really frustrated that nobody knew, or like people that are around me that knew about it. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of online communities that, like small online communities that know a bunch of people, but I wanted to like help make them more accessible, especially since not only a diverse range of games are being made by different people, but like organizations that manage events and workshops that are aimed for different people, different backgrounds, different skills, and interests. So I thought it was amazing, and I went out to these events and workshops, but I noticed for a while, and I'm not sure if it's unique to the Toronto community, but it was sort of like the same people were going to the same events, and I didn't kind of feel like I belonged. So at the same time, these organizations are doing important work and it's relevant, but they're also in the process of development, and some work could still be done. So since I had difficulty finding community within these existing communities, I took it upon myself to create something for myself, to create a space that is welcoming, inclusive, open, but also fun. So I decided to incorporate all these things that I enjoy about video games and applied it to my personal interests. So I like sharing new games with people, I like playing with others, and I like teaching people how to play games. So that's why I thought a pop-up arcade would be perfect. So after a month of planning, last October, I officially opened Ludic Arcade and at Ryerson University for 2 days, and it was great. And I will show just a couple of the photos of the event that happened. So I had 7 games that you saw before, had about 10 volunteers, and I had a lot of participants. However, I'll admit that not everything went as planned. This was my first time doing any sort of this work, so a lot of mistakes were made, and I acknowledge that. So at the end of this talk, or which I'm coming to now, I will be summarizing with 5 main points that I hope I can share with people who might be interested in doing similar work, or if you can apply it elsewhere, then that's great. I want to say that I don't claim that this is like a fundamental checklist of things, and I'm most definitely not an expert at any of this. However, I want to share my insight to assist anyone else, or maybe prevent others from making the same mistakes that I did. So the first thing is make the event for yourself or yourselves if you're planning with a bunch of people, which I also suggest you do because it was a lot of work to do by myself. So your projects are for you. I know the event was, I wanted to make, or like have other people have accessibility to other games, right? So I was like worried, oh no, will they be able to play this game? Will they be able to get to this space? Stuff like that. But honestly, this is the #1 most helpful pieces of advice that I've ever gotten from people. I was lucky I didn't have to learn this. I probably would have gotten more stressed out throughout the whole thing. So, you know, once I stopped worrying about meeting the demands of others, it became so much easier to plan and execute the arcade because it functioned the way I wanted it to. So what I'm saying is nurture it like it's your own baby. The second point is be mindful of accessibility to space, technology, and any other resources, and know that there's always room for improvement. It's not like there's a checklist of things and say, yep, I got this, I got this, I got this, and it'll be the same for every time. No, it's every single space you go into, every single game that you have there, there will always be something that you could probably improve on. And I made the mistake, however, I will learn better from that. So what happened was, I've been playing games for a while, and I wouldn't say I play many console games, but I'm familiar with like the D-pad controller. And so I don't remember, I don't know if you saw the games that I had Mount Your Friends, SSMP, those are controller games. And I thought they were fairly easy to learn because they're not like high-level Call of Duty stuff. So, but I didn't realize that there are a lot of people that never really touched a controller before, and that was totally my bad. So that's one thing that happened, and I will remember that for the rest of my life. But in terms of accessibility, because I just didn't know, it's better to work with other people, ask for people's opinions, have mindful conversations with them, because they are crucial to creating a successful and all-encompassing space. So know that if you make mistakes, it's okay. Just know that address it properly and fix it, and hopefully everything will be good. The next point, so following, as an extension to the previous point, have lots of conversations with all parties of the project. So this is one piece of advice that I wish I had prior to the project. Because this was my master's project, I thought I have to do everything myself, I have to make all the decisions. but in fact that was not the case. It was very helpful to get a lot of feedback from different people. However, I also made the mistake of not asking the opinions of the developers that I had, but I could also argue that many of them didn't seem too invested or engaged. But it should be up to me to go out and reach out to these communities that have been there for a long time to see if they had any feedback for me. But also I should mention that having conversations with your volunteers or your participants and seeing what's going on, for me it was a research project, so I kind of had to do that, but just talking with a whole bunch of people, asking, like checking in how they're doing, how they're feeling, those sorts of things, that's very important. At this point, I found that, so themes are very helpful for targeting specific audiences and overall assist in achieving cohesiveness. So I put this up because my theme was not very good and it caused a lot of problems for me. My theme was, so all the games that I showed here were games that I came across the past 2 years in the community, and I thought, oh, maybe I'll like do a thing where it's like, this is the timeline of my Toronto indie game community life sort of thing. But it was very weird because I had games like Not Your Friends, and that was like SSMP, and it was a lot of people that I will say they kind of looked like gamers or like more familiar with games. They loved that. But then I had games like Techno Tarot, and people were like, what is this? I'm not sure what to do with this. So it's really weird doing that because it was very disjointed and confusing. So as a result, the experience was like one-dimensional for a lot of people. And because they would like play certain games and leave the others. So with a theme, audience members are able to explore like a multifaceted view that draws focus on a main idea. So I did a follow-up arcade, and I focused on narrative games, personal experience games, and I felt that was so much better because, one, people they wanted to like go through each game because they knew like, oh, this is like a narrative thing, I will see what's happening here. And it was great because there's more positive feedback that way. But that was just something that I personally encountered. And lastly, focus on smaller audiences and a smaller collection of games. So I had 7 games, and that was a lot. Originally I was like, yeah, I have to have like 15 games because, arcades are like game arcade boxes everywhere. However, I'm glad I did not do that. So I found that having less definitely means more in many ways, and I do not mean necessarily having smaller audiences in the sense that participation is low, but rather you can focus on meeting the needs of smaller people. That also goes along with having a theme because you're aiming at certain bodies that will relate. And public gaming is like a sort of intimate experience, and it is more comfortably enjoyed with fewer people. So there are also many benefits to having a smaller selection of games, because having fewer games does mean having a longer wait time between games, but it allows for a more meaningful experience. And when paired with a smaller target audience, people are able to enjoy it longer. So when my arcade was happening, I liked the fact that when not a lot of people came, I was able to like talk to people, I was able to take them through each game, and it was more meaningful because those are the people I remember, and I remember their names. And that was really good because I wanted to like bring in a social aspect. Like, people are always gaming online and they're like disconnected from people. So smaller audiences equal more sociability. I don't know. That's how I felt. That's what I enjoyed about the arcade. So yeah, those are my 5 points, and I hope that you folks can do something with this knowledge. I hope to do more pop-up arcades in the future because I have a lot of like neat ideas I want to test out. So yeah, hopefully if not by the end of this year, I'll do something next year. So this is my contact info if you're interested in hearing more about it. I have an arcade Twitter, and it's my personal Twitter, and my email address. So yeah, thank you for coming and listening to our talk.
Yeah. I think we have time for questions. The only issue that there might be is it might be hard to get chairs for you guys. So I'm going to move this over so that it centers on.
There's one here.
We have two right here.
So
Okay.
that's okay.
So why don't? Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yep.
So let's. Would you mind turning on the overhead light there? Sorry. Oh, great. Okay. So if you guys want to pull chairs up to the table here. All right. We've got about 15 minutes left.
There we go. Cool. Well timed.
Yeah. So yeah, so I know the topics are diverge in a lot of ways, but I'm wondering if anybody has questions for you guys individually or about these topics together. Is anybody here planning on doing a pop-up arcade of their own? Yeah.
Well, I have a question. What spaces did you work with, and how was like that in terms of logistics? Like any nightmare situations?
Oh
or
yes,
stories?
yes. There always is. So because I'm under Ryerson University, I figured if I'm a student, why not use the space? So I don't have to like worry about that. But even then, so I didn't know who to contact. I wanted so the space that I was in was our newest building, and I thought it would be great because a lot of traffic goes through there, it passes through the library, that sort of thing. And I contacted some other department within that school, within that building, and they directed me to somebody who was supposed to help me plan these things. However, it might be an isolated incident, but I found out that through contacting him, he was very distant. And when I first met him, it was all great, and we were like, yes, this event is going to go amazing. But then after that, he's kind of distanced himself away from that, and I just thought, oh, maybe he's busy, and he kept doing that, so I was like, okay, maybe he's just not very good at dealing with this sort of work, but that's his position, so I thought it was really weird. So because he kept distancing himself away from me, the spaces that I got were not ideal. I wanted the main floor space, which most of the pictures that you saw were there, but he got me to like a 5th floor silent study area where nobody went. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because it was a silent study area and people would walk by and they would be like, what is this here? And I even had like a couple students wanting to file a complaint that this seminar room was being used for video games. I'm like, you're kidding, right?
Oh no.
This is for free? Like, can you just chill? I don't know, who doesn't want to play games, but I don't think there was a problem where we could complain. So in terms of space, ask earlier and make sure ask a bunch of different people to see if they get their story right. Mm-hmm. Because afterwards I contacted the actual staff of the building and said, why didn't you do this in the 1st floor? And I'm like, that's what I wanted the whole time. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you guys sort of a rigmarole of who to contact, and everyone said to contact someone else.
Yes.
Sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So have more conversations. Ask other people what's happening.
Yeah, working with institutional partners is always challenging because you never know. I mean, that's one of the great things about universities is like that they can offer you space and they have resources, but I think you're hitting upon the challenges that come with that, which is that sometimes, you know, you end up kind of on somebody's desk that didn't necessarily ask to do that, and you can get kind of shuffled around, and that can be an issue. Yeah. Did other people have questions? What do you guys want to field?
Have you thought about doing autonomous arcades? Like, for example, a big arcade box with robot on the base inside actually moving on its own?
I'm not equipped for those sort of things. Like, my position is like I'm a coordinator, so I will pick people out and I want to show off people's talent. That, if I could find somebody who does that, then I would help try and coordinate something. But that's a really good idea, and if anybody else wants to do that, I will help you get it somewhere.
Yeah, that seems like it could be a really cool project.
In terms of metafiction, have you seen examples of it in empathy games? Because I feel like that could be a really powerful mechanic in those kinds of games.
I feel like I have. I might have to get back to you later on that.
Because I'm just thinking about how empathy games is so much about like helping players like have a different perspective on things.
Right.
But then it also kind of has the issue of, oh, I played this game, therefore now I know everything and I'm a good person.
Right.
And so I feel like using metafiction to help players like kind of get more immersed and also like you still don't know everything.
Yeah.
Like could be a powerful component.
There's a game I find really applicable called Bluebeard's Bride. Bluebeard's Bride. Tabletop RPG where everyone is that the main character, the game master actually plays the same person, different facets of that person. So you can't even know your own self, quote unquote, fully.
You say it was a Bluebeard's
Bride. This is a really good game by itself. Too.
Right, I've heard that talked about as a really good example of feminist game making because there's a lot of interesting critiques of that Bluebeard fairy tale as like a kind of discussion of violence done to women in the world. Yeah.
Another question about fiction. I think it was immersive was the voice control one, the pipeline? Or?
Yeah, immersive's where it brings you in.
You said non-standardized control methods as being a kind of useful metric to measure whether or not it falls in that category. If, say, like voice activated stuff becomes like the next big thing, will that drift away and that's no longer metafiction? And would things like the Wii with having the way motion controls work be considered immersive?
Right.
If that wasn't common?
I think it's kind of a gray area, right? So, I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase it. Depending on, for foregoing the argument that all games have stories or all games don't have stories, when you play a game like Dance Dance Revolution, be it on the Kinect or using like Wiimote controls, it does make use of your body in real space, but it isn't really promoting any internal story. You're following through basically completing these timed puzzle mechanics in order to get a high score. So it's kind of self-aware, but it's not really to propel any narrative forward. If alternative controllers such as the Oculus become more prevalent, they could be considered internal metafiction, to my understanding, if it admits that you are playing in a virtual reality headset. So if the game knows that you're doing things in virtual reality versus just putting on a headset and saying, this is metafiction because I can look all around me now. Does that answer your question? A little bit? Okay.
And I guess more to the point, just is there a point that it would be like cease being metafiction and then just becoming a convention of medium? Or like a control convention?
Maybe. I think it would still be metafiction. There's conventions that most writers use, standard three act plot. Those are conventions, but it's still used commonly. So you could have metafiction just become a very standard thing that everyone's using, but it's still an element you can kind of understand separate.
Okay.
Oh, to revisit that voice example, a good contrast would be using voice controls to execute some action in the game versus addressing a character through voice controls in the game, in like an actual conversation, like talking to your phone as if there was someone on the other end of the line, and what looks like a phone call controls.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be much more meta. If I said that correctly.
That'd be really cool. There's also like a weird area with things like pet simulator games, because it's obviously not a pet, and it kind of knows it's not a pet, but it never directly addresses it. So I don't know where that really falls on the spectrum. That'd be something worth looking into.
Are you saying my
Where's the
negative
meta
estimate cat's not real?
terminology?
What?
Are you saying my
No,
negative
no,
estimate?
no. It's real. It's just not real.
That cat food. Well, nothing, but still.
I have a metafiction question as well. Normally when we discuss the narrative modes, traditionally, we say like emergent narrative is what the player brings to the table.
Yeah.
Can you think of any examples in metafiction where it's player-led metafiction going on, like something that the player has kind of seeded and discovered and steered themselves?
Right. You mean outside of like the Monkey Island example, that was like a player-chosen option, right?
Yeah.
You mean something that's more player-initiated beyond that?
I know we don't get a lot of space to sort of play on that level.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if you have any examples where we're given a chance to sort of be a bit cheeky and create some metafiction behind
Right.
the scenes of the main narrative.
So an interesting thing with metafiction is most times it has to be pre-built into the game. Like it's hard for players to truly bring it into the world. I think if you were to try to bring metafiction into a game, that'd be almost like trying to speed run a narrative. It just doesn't quite work. It's like breaking down the mechanics. But there are instances where if the game's creators prepare for the player to do certain things like that, they can reward the player or provide them with things. I haven't looked into Scribblenauts that deeply, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have things planned out within the game for specific player inputs that may have that kind of metafictional tone that you're talking about. That'd be pretty neat though.
I'd really like to try and do it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun.
That'd be
Have a
cool.
layer on top, yeah.
Is save the date like that?
Is what?
Save the date.
Save the Date? Oh yeah, no, you're right. Save the Date most definitely has that.
Can you play Save the Date?
It's a fantastic game. Check that one out.
How do you feel like it does that in Save the Date? I'm not
Oh,
familiar
sure.
with it.
So, save the date. Well, bam, but like, if you want to go play it, I can't say anything.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, then to your point, and I'm kind of wondering what you think about this in terms of metafiction. Like, I know you're describing it in broader terms than just
Yeah.
like breaking the fourth wall, right? But so like, I almost feel like as players have to really work to sort of avoid the metafiction games. Like we do so much performance within games to sort of stay in character, like have the game conform to what our like fantasy is. That like I wonder if like people, if like kind of like the Leroy Jenkins of the world, or just when you play in the most like getting all the clipping to happen, like is that a form of metafiction, or do you feel like that falls outside the realm of what you're
You
describing?
mean like the actions of Leroy Jenkins the original, or
Yeah, or just when you're playing a game and you like make your character walk everywhere backwards, like is that a
Right.
form of like enforcing your own metafiction, or
like
like
rebelling against the narrative, what the narrative wants you to do, and you're trying to do everything else other than the narrative. Maybe if you kept doing that throughout the whole game, and then at the end there's something special just for you. Like the dev saying, "I see you."
Yeah.
That kind of like that could be a metafiction.
Yeah, if there's some element where the game or the developer hits something in the game where it can respond to your actions like that, it would count according to these definitions. But these are loose, so these are still being molded, so there's definitely room for it to grow. But a lot of games do have hints to Leroy Jenkins, and I think that would be kind of external because it's like the developer having a nod to the player for this kind of shared reference, right? Yeah.
That was sort of more generally my concern, because like in their entire pages detailing like, Easter eggs or references I'm playing Final Fantasy 14 right now, and nearly every quest is some kind of external reference.
Yeah.
To the point where it's kind of like ridiculous and like, dull.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, oh, what, they're trying to be clever. But like, is that sort of only external for you, or is that, depending on how it's implemented, sort of changes whether it's internal or external? Because you're sort of acknowledging within the construct of the game that there's an outside universe.
Yeah.
Some of these titles can be read as not references; they're just clever puns.
Yeah.
But they're also referencing something bigger. So is it a matter of how it's implemented, or is it just strictly if it references outside the game, it is therefore external?
I think it's kind of situationally based. If you know that as a reference to something else, then I think it would be metafiction. I guess, like a stipulation that everything at some point is a reference to some external thing, right? So even a game with dragons is kind of basing its dragons off of all the previous lore and ideas and conceptions that we have of dragons. So there has to be some kind of either a cutoff point, or maybe everything at this point could already be considered metafiction.
So it's less the use. Okay, so what you're saying is there's kind of a fine line between the use of tropes and actual crossing over into metafiction.
Yeah.
So it's not just the use of the trope; it's acknowledging the use of the trope.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And it's not necessarily, at least to me, it's not trying to make a line just for the sake of making different categories, as much as it's trying to find a place we can say, okay, let's cut it here and try to analyze things. Because if you don't have some kind of
use it,
yeah,
as a tool rather than
exactly. Because if the category gets too big, you don't have some kind of working definition. It'll just be really hard to even look at it and try to figure out, what can we work with what we have now. And once we have that solidified, maybe then we can start opening it up to other uses and larger terms.
Well, I think we actually have to wrap up now. But I want to say thank you to both Amanda and James for presenting. This was really wonderful, and thank you for everybody for your questions and your participation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And just some housekeeping. So we're releasing everybody for lunch. There's a lot of food that's very local and easy to get to. As I said before, I recommend Kim's Millennium Market because it's right downstairs. There's also a Hale and Hearty soup. And a bunch of stuff around Metro Tech. There's burgers next door. There's a fancy French restaurant on the other side of the building if you want to go for that. But we're actually going to get started again at 1:30. So try to be back in time for that. So we'll be sending everybody out to the workshops. So thank you guys. This is wonderful.
The reason is because it's not like more
Yeah.
It's Jeffree Star.
Thanks so much.
Have you heard of? I like just discovering them.
I know.
That was the game I was ranting about yesterday, about how board games as board games as an entity has completely dried up their entire ideals of what a board game can be. Because it's the one that is a board game about collectible card games. Oh no, so basically, it came to me in a way that I hate about myself, where it was like, oh, this is referencing this part of my life, but I'm realizing that that's just what it's doing, that it's specifically trying to be appeal to that experience. That's cool, and if you do it well, that's awesome, because I still like doing that, but it's still I agree this is what it's doing.